Welcome to the first of our post-upgrade webinars. This one will be taking a look at the holdings editor. So we're just going to take a quick look at what has changed within the holdings editor. For the most part, it's aesthetic changes, not significant functional changes, but we'll be looking at both aspects of it. And we will talk a little bit about some of the things that may be a little bit different in terms of your workflow, as well as what's basically the same and how you can continue to do the work that you've been doing. I especially thought that this would be useful for those of you who may be new to item cataloging and just getting started figuring that out. So this can also work as sort of an introduction to item cataloging webinar as well. So today we're going to talk about setup and preferences. We're going to talk about the process of editing call numbers. We're going to talk about working with item attributes, and then we're going to talk about templates, which is where the biggest functional changes are really coming in. But even those are relatively small. Before we get into most of what we'd be doing within the holdings editor, I did want to talk about the preferences. There have not been significant changes to how you can set up your preferences, but I did want to do a quick review of those. The holdings preferences allow you to change the view that you get when you are looking at the item attributes and the holdings editor. The biggest thing is that you can unify your holdings editor so you can do call numbers and items at the same time. Um, and then you can also create some defaults in terms of the view that you have. So let's take a quick look at that. So if we are in the holdings editor, let me just get to a page for that. And there are, of course, a lot of different ways to get to the holdings editor. So I'm going to go in through a bib record, but you can also get there through the item status screen and buckets and a variety of other things. But if I'm looking at the holdings editor, the default view of it, you have 4 tabs along the top. We're going to go into the third one here, preferences, to change what we see. And so within the preferences tab, you do have a few different things. You have holdings preferences in terms of both display and creation defaults. You have item attribute settings, and then you have hide item attributes. So we'll go through each of these sections one by one. The first one is up here, the holdings display preferences. This allows you to determine what you'd like to show up in the section of the holdings editor where you're working with call numbers. So you can, if there are certain things that you never really mess with when creating a call number, such as prefixes or suffixes, you can just hide those. So for example, if I'm looking at my holdings editor and I see that I have this column for classification, column for prefix, column for label, suffix, barcode, item, and part, and my library does not use prefixes or suffixes, then I can come into preferences and I can hide those 2 columns. And then when I come back and take a look at this, I see that they're no longer showing up. So if you find it easier to remove those fields that you wouldn't normally use, you can do that, and you can always add them back in later. So if my library determines that we're going to start using prefixes, we still won't use suffixes, I can unhide that prefix column. And that allows me to now have the prefix there, but the suffix is still missing. Now, the next section in here is holdings creation defaults, and this allows you to determine what your default settings are going to be for your call number creation. So your default classification, if your library uses Dewey, you can set that as Dewey. That is actually, I think, the default in general, so you may not need to actually do that. But if your library, for example, has your own sort of um, local setting for that, you can make it generic. Also, if you always use a prefix, so for example, if you're in a library where each cataloger has sort of a different focus and your focus is always on, let's say, um, adult fiction, and your library's prefix for that is AFIC. You can set that as your default. And so when you're looking at your holdings editor, um, we'd have to look at so when you're looking at your holdings editor, um, that would show up here. Let me find one that is actually for PAC where I'm currently logged in. So let's go with history. Um, then those are going to show up as your defaults. If you don't put anything in there, I think they'll show up anyway. I don't think that the holdings creation defaults are widely used within Cardinal. And these are not major changes. These are things that existed in the holdings editor previously as well. Item attribute settings down here are where you can determine primarily how you'd like things to function within your library for StatCats. You do have this option to change the circ lib when the owning lib changes. If your library does not use floating, but you do move things around a lot, and so your owning library and your circulating library usually change in tandem, and that change is sort of a frequent change that happens. So, for example, if you rotate things on and off the bookmobile, um, you can make it so that you basically only have to make one change because when you change the owning library, the circlet will automatically change to follow that. So depending on how you catalog how items are moved around your system, this may be useful for you. Another thing that you can do is if your library uses StatCats, then you can preset the filter for those StatCats. Now, of course, you will automatically only be seeing your library's StatCats. You're not going to see other library StatCats showing up, but you can filter out, say, Cardinal specific StatCats by doing this. And then item alert types. If you set a lot of item alerts, but they're all the same type, you can set a default of that. So if your item alerts are almost always, let's go with normal check-in, something that would pop up at a normal check-in, you can set that as your default. So a couple of different behaviors that you can set to happen default. Now, of course, these are not set in stone. They'd be your default. You can change any of them manually at the time that you are actually setting things up. So when you are applying item attributes, if it is not a normal check-in for this particular alert, if this particular alert will be a checkout alert, you can set that manually at the point that you're adding that alert, even if the default is normal check-in. And then at the bottom here, we have the ability to hide item attributes. So for example, if your library doesn't use float, then you can just remove that floating attribute so it doesn't show up. If your library does not use any kind of StatCats, you can remove those as well. If you don't use any kind of deposits, you can remove those. And so when you come and look at your attributes screen, all of those things that you don't use are no longer showing up. So it becomes a little bit easier to see. So that's just a really quick review of the preferences and getting things set up for that. Are there any questions related to that? I know we went through that quickly. That's not a major change from the last version, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But those of you who may be new, um, if you have any questions, you can let me know. All right. Well, then let's go on and talk about the process of editing call numbers. Now, again, this is not something that has changed significantly. However, there is one thing that I wanted to point out. Oh, before we do that, there's one preference that I did want to show, and I think anybody who has been cataloging with us for any length of time is already familiar with this one. But for those of you who may be new, the Unified Holdings and Item Attributes display under the Preferences tab allows you to take the Holdings tab, which is where you create your call numbers, and the Item Attributes tab and unify them. So you can look at them as a single tab. And so now everything will show up under holdings. We have our call number stuff at the top, and then we have our attributes at the bottom. So I did want to point that out for anyone who may be new to cataloging. You may find that that works better for you. I think most of our catalogers do prefer that, but whatever works best for you and your workflow, you can set it up the way that you prefer. But let's go ahead and talk about call numbers. So the call number section, if you have unified your holdings, is up here at the top. And the call number section basically lists the owning library, the classification scheme, prefix and suffix if you've included that, the call number label and the barcode, as well as an item number if you need that, and then monographic parts, which we won't really get in here today. You do have the ability to batch add any call numbers. So if you're creating multiple call numbers when cataloging, you can do that up here at the top, where you can create multiple different lines for call numbers and then make a single set of changes at the top and click apply to apply them to each line. Now, those of you who have been cataloging for a while may see one of the big differences in terms of the call number is that we don't see quite as many of the little icons up here at the top. Let me very, very briefly, I'd like to take a quick look at creating a new call number for this particular section. So right now we're looking at an existing call number and item, and that's where we'll be spending most of today. But I also want to show you what this looks like when you're creating a brand new one. So if I add holdings for this, then this is where those defaults are showing up because I'm getting my default classification and history. My call number label is being pulled from the MARC record, so I'm obviously going to want to change this. This is where I'm seeing the various icons that allow me to add multiples. In the existing one, I'm not seeing those anymore. Prior to the upgrade, those did show up. So if I wanted to add, let's say, I'm adding 2 copies. One is going to be in East Asheville, one's in PAC. I've clicked this plus sign. I've noted my owning library. And now I could go in here and I could change each one of these individually, or I could come up to the top and I could say, I don't want a prefix and my call number label is going to be Thick Hoover. And then I'll batch apply that, and it's changed those both. Although it did not override my default prefix, I'm going to remove those manually. Then I just put in my barcodes over here. So this is what this looks like when you're cataloging a new item versus when you are working with an existing item. So here, let's come back to our existing item. The interface looks about the same, but just what you're missing here are these plus signs that allow you to add extra volumes or copies. So that's the process of working with the call numbers. One thing that I did want to point out is that when you are adding a call, if you're making a change to the call number, so let's say originally this was new FIC, and now you're moving it off of the new shelf, so you're removing that call number label. If you come down here and click apply all and save, you get a changes pending alert, and then you have to click that a second time. Anytime you're making a change within the call number label, we do have a bug report in for this. You do have to either click somewhere outside the call number label box before saving, or you have to click the save button twice. So just something to be aware of. I believe a few people have pointed out how annoying this is. So we do have a bug report in for this one. I'm not sure how much priority it'll be given, but it's out there. And if it's something that does annoy you, you can certainly add some heat to that bug. But that's just something to be aware of with the call numbers. And I think that's the biggest thing that has been sort of a post-upgrade change. Any questions about call numbers? Okay, Will says it's been getting some attention recently, so it may be some fairly low-hanging fruit, and my guess is a lot of people are a bit annoyed with it. So it might actually get patched. So that's fantastic. Something like that, you don't know if it's going to be viewed as important enough to the development community, but I'm glad to see that this one's getting attention. All right, any other questions about call numbers? All right, well, let's go on and talk about the big deal, which is the item attributes. So your item attributes are basically the pieces of data that show up in this section of the holdings editor that tell Evergreen how that item should function. So that means everything from how it should circulate to how holds should function with it, to where it should be routed upon check-in. Anything that is going to be a function that is applied to this item is determined by the attributes that are applied to the item. This is where the big changes come in. So let's pull up the view of this screen within the older version of Evergreen. So if we look at this, in 3.13, this is what it looks like. So we have 5 columns. Those columns are identification, location, circulation, miscellaneous, and statistics. And each attribute within the column is sort of this sort of 2-part box. And if you click within the box, you have the ability to make changes. In 3.15, the columns still exist. The names of the columns have changed. The 2 changes are cost and condition. So instead of miscellaneous, we now have cost and condition, and alerts, notes, tags, and statistics. So instead of just statistics, we now have this sort of full label. In addition to that, the attributes within the columns have changed slightly. And let me remove, or let me unhide some things. So if I am looking at, say, for example, the cost and condition column over here, in the new version in 3.15, we have information about deposits, price, cost, and whether or not the item is in mint condition. If we look at the older version in the miscellaneous column, we have item alerts, stuff about deposits, stuff about the price, opaque, visible, and is reference, stuff about the cost, and then is mint condition. So what they've done is they've removed opaque, visible, and is reference from this column, and they've moved it over to the circulation column because is reference, of course, is going to have a major impact on whether or not the item circulates. When you're talking about circulation, circulation policies, a policy can be basically overridden by the fact that an item is referenced. If everything, even if it's set to circulate, the fact that it's reference may mean that it doesn't circulate because the policy itself says reference doesn't circulate. So is reference is really more of a circulation attribute. Opaque visible, while not directly related to circulation, certainly comes within that umbrella of how patrons are interacting with the item. So that's been moved over to circulation as well. So now cost and condition is really just things related to price and cost, and then whether or not the item's in good condition. Now, is mint condition, if that's not an attribute you're familiar with, mostly comes into play with holds. A patron can set a hold where they ask for items in good condition only. That's only, of course, as functional as whether or not this condition note has been set. But that is an option. So the is mint condition thing is a little bit of an oddball. It doesn't necessarily fit any particular category here, but Oftentimes, of course, if you are going to charge for damage and things like that, that's going to have an impact on condition. So I think that was the thinking behind leaving it in this column. And then, of course, the final column used to be statistics, and it had, I believe it had tags and notes as well as stat cats. Now they've moved alerts over to this column and they've renamed it so that it's really talking about messages related to the item in general. So we do have a lot of different message types. Each of them perform a very different function, and we'll talk about that near the end if we have some time. The way that these are applied, the biggest changes in tags, alerts, and notes. Pretty much functionally the same as they had been, although we have had some people who've been running into issues with notes. If you take a look at the modal for it, let me show you in the old version as well, it has been updated slightly. The content of the modal is essentially new, but the aesthetics of it have changed. What people have been finding though is that their notes are not always saving. So I found that clearing my cache fixed that issue. If you're continuing to have that issue after clearing your cache, then that let us know and we'll continue to dig into what's going on there. See, there's a question in chat. Where would you recommend putting messages to staff about previous minor damages to items? Notes. Alerts are useful. Well, actually, it depends on why you want to share that note. If the note is meant to alert check-in staff that the damage is existing, then I would put that in alerts. If the note is just kind of meant for keeping a record, you could put that in notes, because an alert is something that is a message that comes through to staff upon a specific function. So you can set that function to be check-in, and then every time a staff member checks the item in, the alert would pop up and say, this item had minor water damage on the back cover. So they don't charge the most recent patron for that water damage. It's existing. They know that. So if that's what your purpose in it is, then that's where you'd use an alert. Notes are most useful when you're going to be running reports on things. So, if you just kind of want to keep a record of when damage happened and then you run regular reports on that, you'd put that as a note. But if you do want to alert staff, then alert would be best. And in fact, let's go ahead and make one of those. Skipping ahead just a little bit, but since it came up in chat, I think we can go ahead and talk about it. So if you're creating an alert like that, you would click on the alert button. And so you'd create your new alert type of normal check-in. So this would be when a staff member checks in the item, that would be the function that would trigger this alert. And then you would type in your note here. And you would click add new. And now it goes into the section for pending. And if we did the same thing in the older version, I'll just show you what that looks like so you can compare it. So we would change this to a normal check-in. And we click add new and we get pending here. So it looks a little different, but you're getting the same functionality. In 3.15, you click apply changes. And then now it's telling me I have 3 alerts, 1 new alert. After I have saved that, because now I have this changes pending alert down here. So after I save this, now it just says 3 alerts. That's where the difference comes in between this version and the previous one, because if I apply these changes, I get nothing here telling me anything happened. I do get the little changes pending thing. And after I click apply all and save, oh, doesn't really matter. If I click on the item alert button, I would see the alert that I created, but I would have to click on it to see it. Whereas in the new version, I do have this little notation that's letting me know how many alerts are currently added to this copy. So that if you are dealing with a water damaged or a damaged book, and you want to check to see whether or not there's already an alert on it, if you see that there are no alerts at all, then that tells you right off the bat that there isn't. Let's see, Deborah in the chat says alerts are also helpful for staff to know the number of discs in audiobook, music, and movies. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons that you might use an alert. So you might want to have alerts on check-in, um, so that staff are checking to make sure that the correct number of discs have come back. You might want an alert on checkout for the same thing so that staff can make sure that the correct number of discs are being checked out. A lot of different things that you might want to create an alert for. You can also create temporary alerts. So, if there's something that staff only need to be alerted to it once, then you can make it temporary and it's automatically will be removed as soon as a staff member has received that alert. As soon as the function that would cause that alert has cleared, then that alert will no longer show up. And one thing, if we look at our alerts in the older version, actually, this may not be as new as I thought. Give me just a second. Oh, never mind. I was excited about something for a moment, but what? Yes, temporary alerts are supposed to auto clear. Are they not auto clearing for you, Deborah? I can do a little bit more testing on that to see if I can figure out what's going on with that if they are not auto clearing. Okay. I'll look into that after this webinar and see if I can figure out why they're not auto clearing. I think they are meant to, but there could be a number of different things that are causing that not to work. All right. So our final column over here, the alerts, notes, tags, and statistics, has updated in a couple ways. One of the big ones, of course, is that all of these message types have been consolidated into this column. The other is that you now have information about any of these messages that have been added already. So you don't have to click into the alerts or tags in order to see that. And we'll come back to this at the end as well. Another thing that is useful to know is that if we're looking at our older version of this and our resolution is different, so I'm not sure that I can change the resolution within WebEx. I can't. Let's do it this way. So if we are looking at this in the older version and we change the resolution, our columns just get squeezed. Whereas in the new updated version, our columns are responsive. So now our identification, location, and circulation columns are up here. Our cost and condition column is underneath, and then we actually have this different layout altogether for alerts, tags, notes, and statistics. So we have this new responsive design that does improve that visibility if you do have different resolution sizes on your screen. So just something to be aware of. For the longest time when we first did the update, because of the way my resolution was set, I just thought they had moved alerts, notes, tags, and statistics to that, that lower level line. It took me a while to realize that nope, it just changes as my screen size changes. So something to be aware of. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the other changes that have happened in here. One of the big things to be aware of is this identification column. You'll see that only one thing is in blue here, and that's item status. Everything else is in black. And then through the other columns, everything showing up is in blue. What that means is that the blue things are editable, the black are not. So if we look at our older version, there was no indication of which attributes were editable versus not editable. If I clicked on one that is not editable, I can't do anything. So, that's the only way I know is if I try to change the active date and I can't. I now have this indication that active date is non-editable, and if I click on it, nothing happens at all. Versus in the other one, it still sort of had that field that looked like I could make a change. Um, so if I click on active date, nothing happens. If I click on item status, I have this very visual change in terms of how it looks. So I'm able to change to see immediately this is something changeable. Um, so that's something to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is that when you are making changes in here, there is in prod right now, this says clear. We are working on changing it. And so in next, it's showing as revert. Avoid using this, particularly on shelving location, because that can have some unintended consequences that potentially could crash the system. Basically, we're changing this to revert because what this actually means is if you have made a change here and you want to undo that change, you can do that by clicking the revert button. Whereas the current version that we're seeing in prod where it says clear, it's not necessarily obvious that that's undoing a change that's been made. So theoretically, someone may try to clear an existing field and by hitting the clear button, which is not necessarily the behavior that they're going to get. So what we're saying right now while we work out this particular bug is just ignore this button. Whether it says clear or revert, just don't do anything with this button right now because it's having some funky consequences that are not particularly useful. Instead, if you've come into something that you don't want to make a change for, just click cancel and that'll take you out of that attribute. If you wanted to clear this, you could delete and hit apply, but you're going to get this ugly little notice that this is not going to save properly because there has to be a shelving location set. So for things that don't need to have something set, like floating group, you could delete that and you'd be okay. Shelving location, you do of course have to have something. Functionally speaking, as you just saw, when you make a change, and you hit apply, it turns green. So this is very similar to what we had before. Whereas if I came in here and I changed my owning library and hit apply, it would turn green. So we still have that visual cue that a change has been made. And then of course our changes pending notification, which we already looked at briefly, now goes across the entire bottom of the screen rather than this small little yellow box. So I could go ahead and apply these and now those changes have been made. But I can continue to make changes because I just hit apply all and save rather than exit. Those are the major differences here in terms of functionality. We're not seeing significant changes from the previous version. If you are setting if you're setting your attributes, you simply click on the attribute you want to change and make your change and you're all set. Versus the exact same thing was happening in the previous version of it. It just looks a little different. And that's really what we're dealing with for the most part here, is that most of this is not significantly different than what we were seeing. It's been changed in terms of the way the interface looks. Are there any questions about any of the columns or groupings, or questions about the process of working with the attributes themselves? All right, well, let's go ahead and then we talked already about alerts, but the other thing that has some kind of fairly big changes within the world of item attributes are tags. So in the previous version, if I wanted to add a tag to an item, I would select my tag type and then I'd start typing, and I could type anything I want. Add that tag, apply changes, and now I've just created my own tag. The way that tags function in Evergreen is that they are meant to create a non-standard search term, essentially. They don't have to be used just for searching, but they allow libraries to group together like items that might not be otherwise grouped based on the metadata in the mark tag or shelving location. This is primarily used for donated items that would receive a digital book plate. So, if you have 25 items that were donated by the estate of one of your former patrons, um, you can group those together using a tag. The problem with the way that it was functioning before is that when I went in and typed donated by Mary Atkinson, I did it like this with a typo and didn't even realize it. And I added it, and now that's on there. Then another item, another cataloger comes in and they type donated by Mary Atkinson without the typo. And they apply that. And now that tag's out there in the world. And they're two separate tags, which means they're not doing that function that we want in terms of creating that umbrella. This was a bug. It was a bug we didn't even know about until a couple of days ago. Um, Basically, there is a permission type that allows people to create item tags that wasn't being hit, so it wasn't blocking the creation. So people were creating these on the fly, which could lead to inconsistencies in how they were being created. That bug was fixed in this upgrade, which means now if I come into 3.15 and I go into tags, I select my tag type, and then I put in donated by, oh, you know what? I need to do this slightly differently. Bear with me. All right, so I come in here to my tag and I type donated by Mary Atkinson. Nothing happens because I, as an item cataloger, don't have the ability to create an item tag. And I'm not actually sure that anyone outside of a global admin can create an item tag from this interface. Item tags now have to be created from this interface. So I can come in here and as an item cataloger, I can see what item tags are available. I can't create any. We are working right now on determining exactly how we're going to roll this permission out and to whom. But once we've made that determination, if your permission group has the ability to create an item tag, this is the interface where you will do it, not on the fly. So I have two different item tags that have been created. As an item cataloger, I can add those item types on the fly. So I can't create a new one, but I could come in here to tags and I can select my tag type, and then I can put in the specific tag that has already been created. I click add tag and apply changes, and now that tag is on there. Once I've saved, then I now have one tag on this item. And this allows for that consistency to be managed. One person has created an item tag, and now anybody who's an item cataloger who can update items can apply that pre-created tag to items as needed. So if my library has a tag for items donated by Mary Atkinson, that tag has been created in that admin portal, And now I, as an item cataloger, can select it for any item that was donated by Mary Atkinson as I'm cataloging those donations. So it's a change to your workflow most likely, but it does reduce those sort of inconsistencies. And we're actually kind of going through right now and looking at the item tags that have been applied to determine, is this sort of an ongoing problem with inconsistencies? And we are finding a lot of almost duplicates, things that are basically coming in as multiple different tags, even though they say the exact same thing, because there may be an extra space or an extra period or something like that. So hopefully this will clean that up a little bit, make those tags a little bit more functional. Um, but it does change your workflow, so something to be aware of. Are there any questions about item tags in that context? All right. So those are the major changes within this section. We talked about alerts earlier, not really huge changes. We just have this new little notification, and then tags, and that has been one of the more significant changes having to do with the workflow. So that does bring me to the final thing that I wanted to show, which is templates. So you may notice that if I'm looking up here at the top where I would normally find all of my stuff about templates, the only thing I see is my drop down box and the button to apply a template. So I can select a template if I have any, um, and then I can apply it. And actually, I don't think I have any because I'm in my item cat account now. Where do I make them? So that now happens under this new tab. So if we look at the older version of this, we see that we have the holdings tab and the preferences tab. If we hadn't unified the holdings, we'd have holdings, attributes, and preferences. We now have a new tab for administration. This is specifically template administration. So under this tab, I can create new templates, and then I can also import and export those. I can also edit existing templates. So let's go ahead and create a template from this new interface. So if I click on create template, then I have a new tab that opens where I have access to all of my attributes. I can name my template, and then I can determine what I would like um, all of the attributes that are added by default to an item under this template. I can determine what those are. So I would just do those one at a time. Now, some of these you don't actually need. If I don't have anything in my template for can circulate and is holdable, there's a default value for that. So I'm going to get a yes for both of those by default, even if the template doesn't have that. And once I've created all of the attributes that I want to have included in this template, I click the Save as New Template button. And I can go away from this tab now. And so if I come into my holdings tab within the item, I now see that my templates dropdown has this adult fiction template, and I can apply it, and that's going to apply all of those attributes. So Deborah is saying that it would be nice if templates allowed you to save call number info. For example, a template for juvenile fiction could have juve-fic already saved in the template. So previously that was not possible, but actually, let me take a closer look. So yeah, no, you can't save actual call number data within a template. You can save prefixes. So if you use, for all juvenile, you had a prefix of, you know, juve, you could apply that to your template, but the call numbers itself, no. So that the prefix did not. Yeah, we can look into creating a wish list item for that. That I think a lot of people would probably find that useful. Um, so templates themselves functionally very much the same in terms of the application of them, but in terms of working with them, changed a little bit. Of course, those of you who may have been familiar with templates primarily from the admin menu, this is very similar to what you would have been doing that way. But for those of you who are working with templates primarily within the holdings editor, um, it's now been sort of pushed off into this administration section. Now, within the administration section, you do have the ability to make edits, which we just did. You can also export. And before I do that, I want to do a very quick second template. It doesn't need to be a whole lot. Um, this. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I have two that I can look at in my admin list because I wanted to show you that you can now export individual templates. I believe you could do that from the admin portal for this before, but when you were exporting templates from within the holdings editor, everything exported. But now you can select which ones you want to circulate or to export. So if I click just adult fiction and I export it, um, it exports that JSON file of just the adult fiction template. Now I still have the ability to export all, so I can export every single one of my templates. If I have a new cataloger coming on board and I just want to give them all of the templates, I can do that. But I can also determine which specific ones I'd like to import. And then of course, as a cataloger, I can come in and use the import button and find that newly shared JSON file to import it. All right, and so that really is the major changes to templates. Overall, the functionality of templates is the same. It's just a different, slightly different interface for the creation and management of them. But it does give you a little bit more flexibility when working with templates, just because you do have this grid here where you can work with everything that you have, edit things individually, import and export things. Are there any questions about templates? All right. Any questions about anything then? Because that does bring me to the end of what I had to talk about today. So are there any questions about any of the changes or just in general about working within the holdings network? Thanks for being here, Missy, and for everything for all of you who were able to attend today. Um, So I have recorded this and I will make sure that I get that recording set up on YouTube and sent out to everyone who attended or who registered. So for those people who were not able to be here live, hopefully they're able to view this. If you do have colleagues who you think would be interested in this information, whether or not they registered, please feel free to share the recording with them. And I'll also be, just posting it up on YouTube so it's available to anyone. Um, and yeah, Lauren, I know I have not yet updated the training materials to match the new interface yet. That is next on my list. So I'm glad that this was helpful for you. One of my reasons for doing this so quickly after the upgrade was for that exact reason. For those, we've had a lot of people get their item cataloging assessments done recently. So I wanted to make sure that we were getting the new information out to people as they were learning. Well, I appreciate everyone's attendance here today. If you do find that you have follow-up questions as you are working with any of this, please feel free to reach out, and I will see you at the next webinar. So have a great rest of your day. And I am going to go ahead and end the webinar. So I appreciate everyone's attendance.